distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session with the title Bridging the Gap in Development Finance Architecture, Catalyzing Private Finance for LDCs. My name is Anders Berlin. I'm the Director for the Least Developed Countries Investment Platform at the United Nations Development Capital Development Fund, UNCDF, and I'm honored to moderate this session. Thank you. And I really hope this event will provide us with an opportunity to discuss how we jointly can provide more capital to the small and medium-sized enterprises in the be it with concessional loans, guarantees, grants, specific joint facilities, technical assistance, PA, or regulatory or policy change. There is simply an unmet need, especially for SMEs, to need capital in the range of 100K up to a couple of million. How can we help them get that finance? We have an excellent panel with the Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs, Honorable Sosten Wenge, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Canada to the UN, Bob Ray, Director of the Department of International Organizations at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Qatar, Mr. Ali bin Khalfan Al Mansouri, Vice President of the African International Organization of Employers, Ms. Jacqueline Mugo. After the panel, the people I just mentioned, we will enter into a roundtable discussion with an equally impressive list of speakers, but I'll come back to them in a short while. But first of all, I would like to welcome UNCDF's Deputy Executive Secretary, Mr. Xavier Michon, to provide some welcome remarks. Xavier, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anders. So, Excellencies, colleagues and friends, again, it's a great pleasure to be with all of you and to discuss the subject that is really dear to our heart, but also that we see that is a leitmotiv in this LDC5 conference, which is how to access capital and entice and support the SMEs in LDCs to bridge that gap and finance the activities and promote growth and improve and provide impact to the communities that they serve. Let me introduce UNCDF. For those who don't know us, we're an autonomous organization. We're serving the UN as a catalytic financing entity. And what do I mean by that? We are a first risk taker in a space that maybe is not too present for other players, which is basically in early stage, early financing, risk taking on early stages with technical assistance, grants, and we incubate, we accelerate. And I think other players come along the way, but at a later stage. And we provide also, as part of our toolkit, loans and guarantees. Anders, the director, is here present because that part falls under his responsibility and his team. And one element that I would say is specific to our role is exactly the ticket size. We do believe that SMEs have a tremendous role to play. This is, when we look at the African countries, who allow me to quote that, most of them are privately owned. This is led by women. That's where creativity, innovation is coming from. That's where youth has a part. And we do believe that in an equation of development, this is a variable that is fundamental and needs to be supported. So it is our engagement on that side to support the SMEs as an enabler of change and as an enabler of impact and development. In that size, we have, besides our instruments, we do believe that our role is to take those ventures closer to commercial capital. And one of the things we have done is that we have connected those SMEs with third-party fund managers. So we have actually 3 fund managers that are working with us. In this case, or the case of the SMEs, which is a specific fund that we are deploying called the Build Fund, the third-party fund manager, which is basically picking up on the pipeline that we elevate to them, and then it's being distributed to private capital markets. And just to let you know that we also provide a first loss tranche to make, let's say, the investment per se of the portfolio more dynamic. So as you see, there's a whole sequence of basically deployment that we provide, but our objective is really having a catalytical dimension, proof of concept. We know that investment and investors are following each other. There's a herd phenomenon, so what we want is also having success stories that basically showcase that there are experiences They are assets that are providing basically not only impact but also a good story in terms of the viability of that investment and the risk that is associated with it. Let me finish also in terms of another element that is specific to the unit that Anders represents. We also support to build other players and national actors architectures, so financial architectures. And for example, we have supported the establishment of the Credit Guarantee Corporation in Cambodia. They were capitalized with $200 million, and so far they have deployed about $92 million in loans. That's the catalytic element of our work, and we believe there's much more to do. So, having said that, we're here to listen, we're here to participate, and just to put ourselves at the disposal. I think there's much more that we can do together, and we're happy to connect the dots, as we all have our competitive advantage. But what we want to stress is that basically we do that under the leadership of the countries that we serve, and basically making sure that basically our support is provided within the strategies, sectoral strategies, development strategies, and where basically private sector development, the role of basically of private actors is becoming more and more. Having said that, I'll stop that, and again, thank you for giving me the floor, and again, I wish you a very fruitful conversation, and happy to discuss with you after this very interesting time. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Xavier, Deputy Executive Secretary of UNCDF. So before we enter into the discussion, let me say just a few words of context. Small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs, have always remained the driving force in sustaining the economy of any nation, both by job creation and contributing to GDP. In a recent study by ILO, it is shown that 70% of jobs are created by small businesses. A World Bank study shows that SME contribute to 50% of the GDP. This is why governments all over the world should attach a lot of importance to SME growth. Increasingly, the SMEs has also shown to be good promoters of the SDGs, and we see a lot of impact entrepreneurs around. And this is also why the private sector is featuring so prominently in the Doha Program of Action, and the very reason why we're all here today. Still, SMEs in the LDCs are struggling to access finance. The high interest rates, the high inflation environment, price increases in commodity markets, and supply chain bottlenecks and disruptions have acutely affected small and medium-sized enterprises across the world, including in the LDCs, or maybe specifically in the LDCs, because they are more adversely affected by this crisis. SME experience a greater drop than larger firms in revenues in the same sector, same location, by around 10% compared to bigger corporates, and that's according to the World Bank study. In this room, I'm happy to see that we have representatives of 4 stakeholder groups, if you can call them so. We have the financial industry, we have governments, we have the international community, development partners, and we have the private sector, some entrepreneurs. As stated, there is a gap in the international finance architecture, meaning many SMEs are not accessing the finance in the journey to growth. One could almost say SME missing middle finance is a public good. And as you know, a public good cannot rely solely on market solution, but requires some sort of public intervention. The missing middle in LDCs is a sweet spot in UNCDF's investment thesis, very much like Xavier mentioned. We may not be as big as the IFIs or have the financing backing like some DFIs, developed finance institutions, but we believe we have a risk appetite in the SME sector few other players have. A main objective of UNCDF's lending and investment operation is to catalyze private funding, which is facilitated by guarantees or subordinated loans. This way we try to engage domestic banks and even international investors. It's lending in action. We also have started an impact fund, a bigger fund, which Xavier mentioned, which is lending takes place within the fund, mixing concessional funds with more commercial. Interesting. The focus of the fund is to invest in SMEs in LDCs. So, UNCDF has deployed several of our investment instruments in Malawi. So that creates a nice segue to introduce the Honorable Minister of Finance from Malawi, Mr. Sosten Wenge, as our first speaker. also speaking on behalf of the group of LDCs. Mr. Gwen, I have a question. So SMEs are struggling in the high interest, high inflation environment. What can governments do to specifically support growth of small and medium-sized enterprises in delivering sustainable development in line with the work program of action? And what does you, as a representative of government, want to see from the international community, the domestic finance sector, and the business community when it comes to SMEs? Yours.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, colleagues. Good morning. It is a great pleasure for me to attend this roundtable discussion and share some of the initial perspectives from Malawi, and indeed on behalf of the group of LDCs, a grouping that we've been chairing this far. Allow me, first of all, to thank the UNCDF for organizing this event, and most importantly for being a committed partner to the LDCs in general and Malawi in particular. The Doha Program of Action strongly emphasizes the role that micro, small and medium enterprises have in driving sustainable and inclusive socio-economic growth and development that our countries need. The MSMEs are critical in contributing to inclusive growth in LDCs. They do create jobs and deliver goods and services that improve people's lives. In Malawi, we estimate that there are almost 1.6 million MSMEs that contribute about 40% of the country's GDP and 24% of our total employment. MSMEs are also essential for structural and transformation towards more productive and diversified economies. For example, SMEs drive digital transformation, help increase energy access by delivering renewable energy solutions, and transform agriculture by promoting the usage of climate-smart technologies and linking farmers to markets. The above notwithstanding, MSMEs are operating in an increasingly challenging environment that constrains their growth and dynamism. As governments, we need to increase efforts to create enabling conditions for SMEs, such as simplifying business solutions and regulations and processes, protecting property rights, and enabling SMEs support mechanisms, export processing zones, and so on and so forth. We must also facilitate greater access to markets. For example, the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement will create a larger and dynamic market for our businesses to pursue, and we should not leave SMEs behind. The current challenging macroeconomic environment with high inflation and interest rates severely limits SMEs' access to finance, and in the sub-Saharan Africa, it is estimated that less than a third of SMEs have a bank loan or a line of credit. As international capital flows dry up and financial institutions become more risk-averse, our group of countries is especially vulnerable as access to credit is tightening even further. The Doha Plan of Action calls for greater allocation of concessional capital and the use of blended finance approaches to catalyze more private finance for SME development. Multilateral development banks, development finance institutions, and indeed donors should place a stronger focus on leveraging their resources to mobilize private capital at scale, and this should include increased the support for domestic financial intermediation and capital markets that can engage domestic and international investors. Excellencies, colleagues, LDCs need targeted solutions to address the financing gap for SMEs that are still too small or too risky to access finance from DFIs, commercial capital providers, or indeed blended financing vehicles. SMEs in our countries face an enormous challenge to raise collateral demanded by financial institutions when they want to access the loans. This situation has been aggravated by the recent economic shocks, which have been worsened by, among others, the COVID-19 pandemic, the natural disasters, and the geopolitical conflict in Eastern Europe. It would therefore be prudent for financial institutions to relax collateral conditions so that SMEs are able to access finances required to grow their enterprises. In Malawi, our Financial Inclusion and Entrepreneurship Scaling Project, FINES, with credit from the International Development Association of the World Bank, is one example of this. Through this project, the Reserve Bank of Malawi is partnering commercial banks, microfinance institutions, and indeed development finance institutions to provide low-cost loans to innovative SMEs. This notwithstanding, SMEs are still struggling to raise the required collateral that would enable them to access substantial resources for meaningful push on their businesses. This is testimony that there is need to scale up this type of support for LDCs. What is needed is an LDC dedicated SME facility that can provide low, if not no interest loans, guarantees and catalytic grants to help SMEs build financial capacity and a credit history that allows them to attract commercial capital over time. The UNCDF's bridge facility is one such already existing vehicle that can be scaled up. Excellencies, colleagues, there is a fundamental role that the private sector needs to play to support sustainable growth and strengthen the resilience of LDC economies. There is growing consensus that grants and concessional loans from official sector partners will not be sufficient to meet the unprecedented financing needs required to bridge the climate and development gaps in the decades to come. It is therefore necessary that the LDC's growth drivers gradually shift from their reliance on public investment to private sector investments, especially in the context of government's fiscal constraints and indeed the high indebtedness of most of the governments as a result of the recent global economic crisis and shocks. One of the key bottlenecks for private investment in LDC related to country risks, which are strongly linked to the state of the economy, the strength of their central governments, and indeed their business environments. These risks tend to strongly limit the capacity of private sector actors to raise affordable funding. And this underlines the importance of the strong commitment of LDC governments to continue to implement the structural reforms required to strengthen the business environment, including investor incentives and forex availability, and build resilient fiscal and external positions. The promotion of innovative financing mechanisms, including blended financing solutions by development partners, is essential in this context as they allow SMEs to leverage private funding by absorbing a share of the risk. Blended financing solutions could support LDCs, including Malawi, to reach the SDGs targets, which would strongly benefit from private funding mobilization. Malawi is facing a large gap between one, the massive investments required to sustainable and inclusive development, whilst building a climate resilient and competitive export-oriented agriculture sector, and two, the limited fiscal space currently available to the government. In this context, the private sector could be encouraged by leveraging Malawi's natural assets, including through credit enhancement, e.g. guarantees from MDBs and other partner institutions. And finally, to limit the external liquidity risks for LDCs, they are often associated with borrowing in hard currency. Countries could benefit from increased borrowing in local currency through forex hedging solutions. Excellencies, colleagues, I look forward to a fruitful discussion and I thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Many great points I took note of here. I think you innovative lending finance solution, absorbing risk, mentioning guarantees, relaxing collateral requirements, a dedicated SME facility, a number of good suggestions that we can put on the table. Let me now move on to Mr. Bob Ray, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Canada to the UN. I know Canada has experimenting with some new investment instruments, and UNCDF is collaborating with Canada in the Build Fund with focus on SMEs and LDCs. More generally though, the international community provides more resources in support of the private sector and SMEs in non-LDCs than LDCs. I think a report that we issued showed that around 6-7% of ODA aimed at mobilizing private sector went to LDCs, and 93% went to non-LDCs. So what kind of new initiatives from the international community do you want to see emerge from this conference in support of SME growth? And what role can blended finance play to catalyze private capital?
Well, thank you very much. It's good to be with everyone. I hope we're looking forward very much to a good discussion. I had the pleasure of co-facilitating the dialogue at the UN in New York on the document that we're going to, I hope, going to be endorsing later on, the declaration that's coming out of our work. And we put a lot of emphasis in that discussion on the role of the private sector in helping to transform development in the LDCs. And as the minister has just said, that we have to make this shift to a greater emphasis on private investment and development, because that has been the key to the success of every growing economy in the world today. Even in an economy like China, which is the most remarkable story of economic growth in the last half century, that has been marked by an explosion of private capital. Often not talked about that way, but that's part of the story. The development of the market after 1980 was a substantial part of the model. As you say, there are a lot of gaps to be managed, and as a former politician, I'm pretty good at avoiding questions, but I won't avoid yours. I'll get to it in a moment. But I get to it in this way, and that is by, when you look at the data, and it's a statistic that you just said, well, most of the money goes to the people who have money. To which one would have to say, well, what else is new? I mean, that's just, if a person with no money goes to the bank, as I was saying yesterday to another much less well-attended meeting, but still a very good discussion, will you lend me some money? The bank will invariably say, no. Why would I lend you money? You haven't told me a reason. I don't think you can pay me back. You have no money, therefore I will give you no money. End of conversation. Leave the bank. Unhappy, dissatisfied, angry. And that's the way of the world, which we have to change. So the question is, what can we do to change that? And I say we, it means everyone who is represented in this room has to help to change that equation. There is a need in governments to fight corruption, to create greater transparency, to provide for the rule of law and predictability in what happens to investments. Where does my money go? Is it protected? Is it going to be stolen? Am I going to get beaten up when I leave the institution? All these basic fundamental questions about how we operate, how life goes on. There's also, I think, a very important question for private investment in each one of the LDCs, which is how much is it encouraged? How much do people see that successful businesses are rewarded? That business is not seen as a criminal activity or a crime against the state, that it's seen as a positive contributor to economic growth and to creating prosperity for everyone, not just for a few. So there are a number of things that each member state in the LDC's community, the 46, has to do for itself. All the rest of the world can do is encourage it to happen and say, yes, we will do everything we can to help you do it, but you have to take the steps yourself. And I'm reminded of the story, which this will be a slight diversion, of the man who's desperately poor and desperately wants to win the lottery. And every Sunday he goes into church and begs and prays to God and says, please let me win the lottery, I must win it. And finally, after the 5th time he's done this, the clouds open up and a loud voice calls out and says, sir, you have to buy a ticket. If you want to win the lottery, you have to buy a ticket. If you want to participate in the well-being of the world, you have to engage. As governments, we all have to engage. There's no room for bystanders. But that is not to say, as is often said, that that's it. We've speech over, you know, the donor communities go away and say, you must do this. No, we, donor communities, have to do things. We have to change the equation from our perspective. And we have to change the equation by understanding better the needs of recipient countries and those who are asking to borrow money and asking to help build the economy. The first thing we can do, not the first thing, but one of the many things we have to do is create the data, the information base in the transparent global economy that makes it clear what the situation is in each country and how we can improve the information flows in such a way that people are more aware of what the benefits and advantages are. The public impression is that there's a huge gap between the risk that people are taking by investing in advanced economies and the risk they are taking in investing in the least developed countries' economies. And that gap is not, that risk gap is nowhere near as big as people think it is. And there's more and more data that's emerging that's demonstrating very clearly that the risk gap is not as big. And therefore we have to blow apart the notion that somehow if I invest in a country that is less developed, that I'm basically throwing the money to the wind and we'll see what comes back, but we don't really know. And so that's a critical role that we can play. The second thing we can do is reduce the knowledge gap. The world of, and listening to the speakers today, the world that is described is quite complicated. And in many cases, the countries that are trying to enter into this world are baffled by it. So Canada has, over the last several years at the UN, where we chair the Friends for Finance and Development, before COVID and now after COVID and during COVID and after COVID, one of the things we're trying to do is bring the private sector, public sector, developed economies, advanced economies, less advanced economies, everybody together in the same room and begin talking not about the needs of one or the other, but the needs of both, so that we are talking to each other. And we are grateful for the help of UNCDF in helping us to do this, because it is really critical that we get more specific at the interface of what is a bank looking for? What is a private bank looking for? And you might skeptically say, well, all they're looking for is money. And the answer to that is yes, of course they're looking for money, but they are looking for information, and they're looking for presentation, and they're looking for something that will give them the confidence that they need, that what is being proposed makes sense. And there is so much work that needs to be done within governments and within businesses to increase the level of awareness, knowledge, information flow that makes people comfortable in having this initial conversation. As a private citizen, I just like going to my bank. I find every meeting I have with a bank manager is humiliating. You know, why haven't you paid off your mortgage yet? Or why are you, you have to explain yourself. It's embarrassing. And no, it's not an encounter that anybody enjoys. But we have to get over that and get people to appreciate the fact that there is a language. We need to make it more approachable, and we need to make the experience one that is addressed equally. Finally, just to be very specific, what has Canada been doing? There's two areas in which we've been trying to make a difference. One is working with UNCDF, for example, on the Build Fund, trying to work on this notion of blended finance. What is blended finance? It's very simple. It's the public sector saying to an investor, we will make the experience of lending money less scary for you by taking away some of the risk, in fact, most of the risk, because it's actually cheaper for us, governments, to give you that money than it is for no investment to happen at all. And so we're de-risking, to use another technical word, we're taking the risk out of it as much as we can, but we're also asking you to take some risk because this is what investing is. It's a risk. How huge is it? Well, we don't know. And everything else, more or less, you have to equal it out, even it out in terms of the projects. So that work that we do on de-risking and expanding the world of blended finance is, I would say we're at the very initial days of this adventure, but it is the future. It is what it looks like. And the second thing we are doing is specifically saying we want women to come through that bank door as much as men do. And we want women-led enterprises to be included in everything we do. We have what's called a feminist foreign assistance program policy, which is a policy which is deliberately intended to say to the world, it's not that we don't like men, it's not that we don't think men are equal, it's that we recognize that we have a serious problem in the world with the lack of opportunities for women entrepreneurs, for women-led businesses, and how they frequently are faced with discrimination in economies that we want to overcome. So that's a critical part. Those are two critical parts of what we do. But when I was a student in England and getting off the tube, there used to be a voice that would come over just as you were about to leave the tube, the subway. And the voice would say, mind the gap. So that's my last word to you. Mind the gap. We have to mind the gap. And we have to overcome the gap. We have to identify it from the perspective of the borrower, from the perspective of the lender, and then we have to mind it. Not only watch it, but help to bring it to an end. And that's really what our effort as a country is all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, for that illustrative speech. Now, and I pick up a couple of things. The perceived risk is higher than the actual risk. Let's show that, and reduce the knowledge gaps on the key points in your intervention. Thank you. Now, Mr. Ali bin Khalaf Al-Mansouri, Director of the Department of International Organizations in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Qatar. Welcome to this panel. Qatar is an important development partner for LDCs. How can the Qatar government help strengthen the private sector in the LDCs? How do you see the private sector in Qatar invest more in the LDCs? Say Malawi, the Gambia or Lesotho, or some of the countries around this table. The floor is yours.
Thank you. My speech in Arabic, if you prepare. Three. Three, yeah? Yes, I tried. It's good exercise. أصحاب السعادة المتحدثون الموقرون، مدير جلسة الحوار، السيدات والسادة، نتوجه بداية ببالغ التقدير لمنظمي اجتماع المائدة المستديرة رفيعة المستوى، ويسعدني أن أشارك اليوم كمتحدث في هذا الحدث، وما يشكل من فرصة هامة لمناقشات التحديات والحلول العملية لحشد توسيع نطاق تعبئة التمويل ورأس المال الاستثماري لتحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة لأقل البلدان نمواً. ونغتنم فرصة مشاركتنا اليوم لنثني على الجهود التي يبذلها صندوق الأمم المتحدة للمشاريع الإنتاجية ودوره الحيوي، وخصوصاً في ظل العواقب الوخيمة لجائحة فيروس كورونا والتحديات الناشئة والمتعددة الأوجه، لا سيما على الفئات الأكثر ضعفاً. كما نؤكد على أهمية الأولوية الفريدة لصندوق الأمم المتحدة للمشاريع الإنتاجية داخل منظومة الأمم المتحدة الإنمائي لخدمة أقل البلدان نمواً في المقام الأول. أصحاب السعادة، في إطار الطابع الملح للاستجابة لتلبية الاحتياجات والأولويات أقل البلدان نمواً، تعتز دولة قطر بأنها شريك رئيسي في الجهود الدولية المبذولة لدعم هذه البلدان، والذي يتجلى على نحو واضح في استضافة المؤتمر الأمم المتحدة الخامس المعني بأقل البلدان نمواً، وما يحظى به هذا المؤتمر من مشاركة متنوعة من جميع أنحاء العالم. ونرى بأن هذا المؤتمر يشكل فرصة محورية للإتاحة لمرة واحدة فقط كل عقد لإظهار الالتزام واتخاذ خطوات ملموسة لدعم الفئات التي هي الأكثر تخلفاً عن الركب، والتي تعيش في أوضاع هشة، وإدراكاً من دولة قطر بالتحديات الخاصة التي تنفرد بها أقل البلدان نمواً. لم تتمون بلادي عن إيلاء الأولوية لدعم جهود هذه الدول، كما حرصت على تقديم المساعدات التنموية والإنسانية في العديد من الدول، ومن بينها أقل البلدان نمواً. الحضور الكرام، يشكل التمويل المبتكر والاستفادة من التمويل الإضافي والقابل للتنبؤ الذي يوزع بطريقة ترعى أولويات أقل البلدان نمواً واحتياجاتها الخاصة، ولا تتقلل من المسائل الهامة، وهو ما تنوه به برنامج عمل الدوحة لإصلاح أقل البلدان نمواً. كما أكد برنامج عمل الطموح على الالتزام بتكثيف الدعم بشكل كبير في شكل تمويل ميسر الشروط على سبيل المثال للمؤسسات المتناهية الصغر والصغيرة والمتوسطة، والمشاريع الاستثمارية الصغيرة في أقل البلدان نمواً، من أجل تعبئة استثمارات مستدامة من القطاع الخاص تنهض بتحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة. ونغتنم هذه الفرصة لنؤكد بأن تنفيذ برنامج عمل الدوحة بفاعلية وفي الوقت المناسب من قبل كافة الشركات وأصحاب المصلحة المعنيين يعد مسألة بالغة الأهمية، ويشكل أداة قيمة لدعم مساعي أقل البلدان نمواً وتعزيز النمو الشامل والتنمية المستدامة وتحقيق الازدهار. السيدات والسادة، في إطار الإسهامات القيمة والدور الحيوي الذي يطلع به القطاع الخاص في تحقيق النمو والازدهار، فإنه من الهام بذل المزيد من الجهود من أجل توفير الخدمات التي تساهم في دعم هذا القطاع في أقل البلدان نمواً وتمكينهم من تعزيز إسهاماته وقدراته على الابتكار. ونرى اجتماع المائدة المستديرة اليوم والفعاليات المنعقدة خلال مؤتمر الأمم المتحدة الخامس المعني بأقل البلدان نمواً فرصة هامة لإبراز وتأكيد على الضرورة الملحة لتضافر الجهود والتعاون القائم على تعددية الأطراف والشراكة لدعم جهود أقل البلدان نمواً ومساعيه لتنفيذ برنامج عمل الدوحة الذي يحدد تطلعاتها وأولوياتها. ختاماً، نتطلع معكم لمناقشة مثمرة والاستماع إلى آراء ومداخلات كافة المتحدثين والمشاركين في هذا الحدث. بالنسبة لسؤالك سيدي، التركيز والاستثمار في الممارسات والمجالات المستدامة. قطر التعليم فوق الجميع. تعمل المؤسسة على ضمان استفادة جميع الأطفال في الدول النامية وتعالج قضايا التعليم كالتزام دولي. التركيز على توطيد العلاقات بين المجتمع الدولي باستمرار. صندوق قطر للتنمية تم يوم أمس توقيع اتفاقية مذكرة تفاهم بين صندوق قطر للتنمية ووزارة خارجية الكومنولث والتنمية البريطانية في مجال التنمية الدولية والمساعدات الإنسانية على هامش المؤتمر. شكرا سيدي الرئيس.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for Qatar for hosting this conference. I wanted to say that as well. And also thank you for mentioning the Doha Program of Action as an important tool to support the overseas. Moving on, so we have Ms. Jacqueline Mugo, who is the Vice President for Africa of International Organization of Employers. She's also the Executive Director of the Federation of Kenya Employees. She's here to my right. You must have a busy time now in the crisis. And I wanted to ask you now, SMEs in the overseas do not always have a strong, unified voice in society and in policy debates. So in these difficult times with difficulty to access finance, etc., what role can business and employers organization play to help improve access to finance for SMEs? And what do you think governments or international community should do more or better of, if you can decide? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak at this very important panel. Good afternoon, distinguished delegates. I think from the discussion so far, we all recognize that SMEs play a very crucial role in driving economic activity and job creation in the developing world, particularly in the LDCs. However, they face significant challenges, including limited access to finance. I think this is the biggest hindrance they face. And this limits their ability to grow and contribute to sustainable development. In these difficult and challenging times, business and employers organizations and the international community can play a critical role in improving SMEs' access to finance. From my experience, the finance is actually available. I think in most African countries, certainly in sub-Saharan Africa, there are specific funds that have been reserved for SMEs, for women, for the youth. But the biggest challenge is that the money is there, but how do you access it? There's just so many complicated requirements about documentation, proving that the organization is above board the governance structures. So that's the challenge, and I believe policy needs to unlock access to finance by SMEs and to provide products whose repayments are not based on profits and history, but on future revenue flows. According to a report by the IFC, SMEs represent about 90% of businesses and more than 50% of employment in LDCs. In fact, for employers organizations, 50 to 60% or above of our membership are SMEs. However, SMEs in these countries face obstacles in accessing finance. Only 14% of them have a formal line of credit from financial institutions. This situation is compounded by lack of financial literacy, inadequate collateral, and high interest rates. So what can employers organizations do? One of our main roles is really advocacy. We aim to influence the policy environment to support SMEs' access to finance and growth, and also we use platforms, various platforms, some through our membership, to persuade governments to create favorable business environments that reduce the regulatory burden on SMEs and promote entrepreneurship. entrepreneurship. It's, I think, ironic that much as we recognize the role of SMEs, the contribution they play in the developing world, and we want them to grow, we still make it very difficult for them to access the money. And today, government is talking more about the role of the private sector, even this afternoon, which also means we have to look at the policy environment, the regulatory environment in which business is done. Employers' organizations can also play a critical role in training and mentorship on financial management, including how to access finance, how to manage cash flows, and how to make sound financial decisions. Governments can also contribute to improving access to finance for SMEs, as I said, by creating a positive environment that supports their growth and development. For instance, they can develop and implement SME-friendly policies, tax incentives, grants and loan guarantees. Also, they can strengthen financial institutions by providing the regulatory reforms that are needed, capacity building, and funding support to ensure that SMEs have better access to finance. In essence, make it easier for them to access this money that is available. The irony is that the money that is often reserved for SMEs, for vulnerable groups, ends up in the hands of larger businesses because the SMEs can't get access to it. Looking at the international community, I believe they can support access to finance for SMEs in LDCs. For instance, the World Bank Group provides financial support to SMEs in developing countries through its International Finance Corporation arm, which invests in private sector projects and provides advisory services. The UN Development Programme also supports SMEs in LDCs by providing access to finance through programs which focus on creating an enabling environment for SMEs. At least, I think these kind of programs can be replicated and enhanced. Also, promoting international trade, and I think there was reference to the AFCFTA by the minister who spoke earlier, can significantly contribute to access to international markets by SMEs. By connecting SMEs with foreign markets, they can increase their sales, diversify their customer base, and gain access to new technology and ideas. There is opportunity to link the SMEs with bigger established businesses for them to be able to have quality products, because some of the challenges they have is being consistent in the quality of products that they produce. Additionally, the International Trade Center, ITC, also provides trade-related technical assistance to SMEs, including training on export readiness, product development, and market access. So having programs and projects that really address the real needs of the SMEs wherever they are within their own context. In conclusion, I believe SMEs play a crucial role in driving economic growth and job creation in the LDC, so improving their access to finance requires a multi-stakeholder approach that involves business and employer organizations, it involves governments, financial institutions, and the international communities. We need to work together. There is need to look at the state of business in the LDCs. Business is still recovering from COVID-19, but you find that really in the developing world there are lots of new levies, new taxes, regulatory requirements that are being reduced by governments as they seek to introduce social protections and areas like that. So we need to strengthen the private sector to be able to play its role to create jobs and also make it possible for SMEs to function. So this multi-stakeholder approach, I believe, provides an opportunity for us to work together towards contributing to the growth of SMEs and contributing to poverty reduction to ensure sustainable economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and I take away governments to be more SME friendly, look at tax incentives, guarantees, strengthen regulatory reforms, and that's a great segue to our next speaker. But just give me a minute and we'll get there. So this is really the end of round one, which may not be so different in format for round two. But I think we received a lot of views on what governments, development partners, and business community can do. What I hope to hear maybe even more in the next set of speakers are concrete actions you're taking in the SME space. And most of all, I will welcome any bold proposals for new initiatives that needs to be launched. Let me ask again, and you heard briefly mention our bridge facility, which is a dedicated investment facility hosted on UNCDF's balance sheet. And our investment target, as mentioned before, is around 100,000 to 2 million. We can do bigger ticket sizes as well, but I think the sweet spot in our investment thesis is there. We believe also it's important to offer technical assistance or business development as well to ensure that these companies are gaining credit worthiness. There's never an aim from us to be financing these companies for long. We want to see them end up with banks, domestic banks. And we also try to couple the capital and the TA with an offer of policy change support to engage policymakers in a discussion about what changes could trigger further growth for the SMEs. So trying to learn from the investments and trying to engage with policymakers. So that's pretty much UNCDF's offer in this space. We have about 35 transactions in the overseas currently, and anyone wanting to know more about the bridge facility, just let me know after this session. I will now turn to our roundtable. You will have around 3 minutes for your intervention, and I will start by giving the floor to Honorable Sida Keiti, the Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs in the Gambia. And we now just heard from a stakeholder here for the SMEs, providing some inputs on what a government can do. And I know that the government of Gambia has recognized the importance of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, and you had a policy for that launched in 2019. Now, can you, Honorable Minister, tell me how has the policy helped the MSME sector grow over the years? And what is the most important recommendation in the policy, in your view, a few years down the implementation? And how do you see the situation today? What can we learn from the last few years of crisis when you look at the SME sector?
Thank you very much, moderator, for the intervention and questions. As you have rightly mentioned, the government of the Gambia has formally approved the MSME policy for the next 5 years, 2019 to 2024. And this policy framework was approved by Cabinet in 2020. Since the creation of that approval, the government has now put in place a motion attempts to institutionalize the creation of the MSME fund, which is at an advanced stage. This is mainly geared towards addressing the acute shortage of access to finance. Not only that, we currently have a plethora of financial intervention institutions that are within the country that address access to finance as a challenge to the SMEs. For example, we have the Social Development Fund that gives financing to the MSMEs in the informal sector, because the biggest challenge the MSME sectors face in the Gambia is access, is the formalization. We have a formalization rate of less than 40%. So that means that we have most of the MSMEs in the informal sector. So how can we help them access finance through the formal sector, which is almost impossible. That's why a number of funds have been set up. One is the Social Development Fund, and at the Ministry of Youth, we have the Youth Enterprise Development Fund. So those are all geared towards creating access to finance for the SMEs, MSMEs. We are also working with partners to de-risk or to minimize the cost of access to finance to the MSMEs, because these are institutions which are very fragile, and access to finance or finance costs comprise a large base of their cost structure. So we have piloted, thanks to the UNCDF, an intervention to support through the guarantee scheme, intervention in this space. And this is at a nascent stage at this stage, but we want to leverage on that because the current financial institution framework within the country is very guarantee driven, and the MSMEs don't have the necessary or wherewithal of guarantee or collateral to support the lending framework. So the way forward has been de-risking. And here also we are working with development partners such as the African Development Bank, where they are de-risking the lending to the agricultural sectors, particularly the MSMEs concerned. And the bank will underwrite as a first loss a certain proportion of any lending. This is mainly in the sense that agriculture is the most and the largest employer in the economy, but the unpredictable weather patterns make them risk levels very high, and the financial institutions tend to shy away from them. So in order to introduce the private sector and incentivize them to go into the agricultural space, the African Development Bank has now partnered with the government to give guarantees for lending to this sector, for which a large number of the MSME sectors are involved. We are also looking at encouraging, in the bigger space, guarantees. Currently, the MSMEs have a lot of challenges on their lending operations or borrowing operations, simply because in terms of LCs, they have to be backed by cash. So LC transactions are costly, and the way forward is to really unwind that and ensure that the guarantee mechanism, and this is where we would need partners like UNCDF to introduce guarantees as a product in the financial landscape to support the financial intermediation. Currently, the financial landscape is mainly cash related, and products such as guarantees, which are very essential to the MSMEs, are not forthcoming much. We have also nationally rolled out recently, last year, a national financial inclusion strategy to encourage a large number of MSMEs to come into the formal sector. And this is also to use the mobile money as a platform for payment that will also reduce the credit processing that the MSMEs go through. And recently, even some fintechs have been in operation in this space. These are the measures that the government has taken, but we believe the effort is not just adequate, as a number of SMEs have suffered a setback following the impact of the COVID pandemic and the Russian-Ukraine war. And we are now looking at how to calibrate our intervention to report them in the light of the challenges and address the key issue of access to finance that will be more affordable and accessible. As we know, the MSMEs are responsible for 70% of the employment creation in the country. So this policy implementation is for the next 5 years, and we'll calibrate it as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister, and I think that was very illustrative of the situation in many countries, and I think your point on letter of credits being costly, guarantees that can actually reduce the cost of credit, and that you're looking at the credit process and making that easier, all very good points for us to bring on to the discussion. So thank you very much. Moving on to Ms. Kitty van der Heyden, Vice Minister for International Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands. Welcome. For a country like Netherlands, with its open economy and proactive trade agenda, supporting SMEs seems to be a good fit, right? So what are you doing as part of your development cooperation agenda to support SMEs in the LDCs, and what changes could be made to even do more? And I also wanted to put sort of a sensitive question that might be on many of the LDC governments' minds. So many governments in Europe are shifting some of its resources to the needs in Ukraine. How do you think the Netherlands will balance the need for resources in Ukraine and the needs that we see in the LDCs?
Always get the easy questions, right? So at least what I don't have to do is explain how important SMEs are and how absolutely crucial they are to eradicate poverty, to grow economies, and to basically deliver everything that we promised in the SDGs, which is a life in dignity for everyone, everywhere. And so I don't think it should come as a surprise that from trading nations like the Netherlands, supporting SMEs and enabling a regulatory environment where the private sector can flourish is at the heart of what we do. And where we do that, well, we have made a very deliberate decision that we focus on the poorest countries. Those are the furthest away from achieving the 2030 agenda, that are most fragile, most conflict prone, most impacted by climate. Now, I know everybody always wants to talk about private sector risk. Well, public sector also takes risks, because I can tell you we spend more time in Parliament because of one thing going wrong than 1,000 things going well, right? We made this decision because we believe this is where we need to go. Now, for me, it's important to understand, because you wanted something concrete, so let me go very concrete, that UNCDF plays an absolutely key role in the development finance architecture, a role that no one else plays. Because UNCDF focuses on making finance work for the poor, right? It focuses on 46 LDCs, and within those LDCs, it focuses on the poorest, and thank you, Bob, for raising feminist foreign policies, on making sure the economy works for women. Why? Because it's economically rational. Now, let me tell you a small story. 20 years ago, I was in New York, and we were president of the board of UNDP, UNCDF, and others. And this was the time when everybody wanted to rationalize, right? Shrinking parastatals, but also shrinking the UN footprint. And so there was a proposal on the table, a few of you will remember this, to abolish UNCDF. We were president of the board, and I was inundated with letters from LDCs telling me, are you out of your mind, UN system, to do this? Because this is the one organization that works for us, and it's impactful. And so the proposal was withdrawn. 20 years later, UNCDF is still there, and UNCDF is making an impact where no one else goes. So let me take a concrete example of everything that is sexy, so to speak, nowadays: locally led development, climate change, and SMEs. Well, UNCDF started to do this more than 10 years ago with the local climate adaptation living facility, well before Paris, right? So UNCDF is doing what it needs to do in places where very few want to go, with an impact that matters for people that matter. And so for me, it's a real pleasure, and I want to go very concrete here to announce that we are coming to UNCDF as a core donor, and we will be contributing 3 million over the coming years, unearmarked. Yes, we have our partner countries, but I want UNCDF to make finance work where it matters most for people that matter most. And it's up to UNCDF and the LDCs together to decide where that is, as long as we get those those SDGs closer than where they are now. And so I feel, I would almost say, a great similarity between the Netherlands and UNCDF. I remember as a student hearing a president from a very big country talking about the Netherlands as small country, big footprint, and he meant our trading footprint. Well, UNCDF is the same. No, you're not the World Bank, small organization, but you do have a big footprint. Now, coming to another item that I know is sensitive, but I'm actually very keen to address it, which is Ukraine. Now, I cannot talk about Ukraine without condemning in the strongest possible words the illegal invasion of the Russian Federation in Ukraine. Let me be very clear, this is a violation of the UN Charter, and it's a violation of a country's sovereignty. And so for the Netherlands and for many other partners, working with Ukraine to make sure that wrongs are righted is incredibly important. That is why we are with Ukraine, militarily, diplomatically, and in providing relief and recovery. This is a war that has many, many victims. I traveled the streets of Bucha and saw the cars riddled with bullets, innocent people that were just trying to get away from war. I am seeing the impact of young people fighting at the front, but I'm also seeing the impact around the world in poor countries that have nothing to do with this illegal war, in terms of fuel prices, fertilizer prices, food prices, and I'm horrified. And so we have taken, again, a deliberate decision that everything we do in Ukraine comes on top of the development budget. Because countries that are suffering the consequences of a war that isn't theirs, but that is our collective war because we have a UN Charter that we stand for, should not suffer additional consequences. So what we do on Ukraine, in terms of relief and recovery, militarily, in terms of support to refugees that come to Europe in my country, none of that goes at the expense of where money needs to go, which is to the poorest of the poor, because we promised them in 2015 an agenda that matters, which is the perspective of a life in dignity for everyone. And we stand by that. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Kitty. And it was not, we haven't rehearsed that UNCDF type of contribution, but thank you for that. We're of course very grateful. And I truly hope that some of that will go to the SMEs.
Anybody else want to give money today?
Yeah. You can see Xavier afterwards. I also appreciate the Dutch stance on making sure that anything going to Ukraine is on top of the development fund. I think that's important to this state. So thank you very much for that as well. Now moving on to a business person, Mr. Mossadegh Bali. You're the president of Conselho Nacional de Patronat du Mali and the CEO of Azalai Hotels Group. Mr. Bali, can you please give us some example of how small businesses have been struggling, first during COVID and now in the aftermath with high inflation and rising interest rates? And what are you and your interest group doing to support SME financing in both as a leader for the hotel group and for the employers organization?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My pleasure with my colleague of CNPM, which is the Mali Employers Association, to be here at this conference, and we thank the United Nations and IOE for inviting us. SME financing, well, in general, financing on my continent, on African continent, is a big challenge. It's not only for SME, but even for big companies. We have a ratio saying that less than 20% of the financing needs on the African continent are met by the banking system. Well, you have, of course, different ratios. In a country like Morocco, it's 80%. In my country, it's less than 20%. But on average, 20% only is met by financing from the banking system. So financing is not only a challenge for SME, but in general for entrepreneurs and for investors. But of course, SMEs are seen as too risky, so commercial banks don't want to finance them. SMEs, as my predecessor said, is of course the backbone of our economies, but most of them are in the informal sector, so the banks don't want to finance them because they are in the informal sector. I totally agree with you, Mr. Moderator. The problem for African investors and African entrepreneurs is that the perception of risk is much higher than the actual risk. I started a hospitality group in 1994 by buying a state-owned hotel in Bamako, Mali, which was a post-conflict country at that time because we had a revolution in March 1991. And from Bamako, we developed, and 30 years later, Azalai Hotel Group has 11 hotels in 7 West African countries. We created close to 4,000 jobs directly and indirectly. We invested close to 150 million euros, and all that from a region which is seen as very risky. So this is the reality of our African continent. The needs are in the south, in our countries, but the resources are in the north, in the Netherlands, DFC, Canada, and they have procedures. I can tell you, Mr. Moderator, even for me, as an experienced businessman, I've been running businesses for 40 years now. I started a very successful hospitality business. Even for me, sometimes it's just a nightmare to process a loan from these big guys. I've been working with IFC for 30 years now, with regional development banks like BOAD, BIDC, with the French DFI Proparco, with the Belgian DFI BO. I've been working with commercial banks. It's just a nightmare sometimes. So, let alone SMEs. So, we think as an employers association that we should have public financing, or at least blended financing, like Mr. Ambassador said. A country like France started 10 years ago a bank called BPI, Banque Populaire d'Investissement. And they put the public money in that to de-risk financing for SMEs. And it's a huge success. This is the kind of thing we should have in our countries. Sometimes World Bank, IFC, they put guarantee funds, but these guarantee funds are, as my colleague from Kenya said, are mainly used to finance big enterprises, not SMEs, unfortunately. Because SMEs, they are just not equipped to go through all the processes that are required to get a guarantee or to get a loan. We also think that we should have programs, and at our association, Conseil National du Patronat du Mali, we are putting together a program with IFC, and we are hiring a program manager who is coming to start that program to accompany the SMEs so that they can process all these procedures, but also to source financing for them. And our aim is to create, during our mandate, we have a 5-year mandate, at least 50,000 jobs in Mali, and access at least $200 million financing for SMEs, for MSMEs. This is a program we are about to start with IFC, and happy to welcome the Netherlands and DFC. Don't take part of the financing for UNCDF, but if you have some spare financing, happy to work with you to create these 50,000 jobs, because we as Africans, our number one challenge is create 15 to 20 million jobs on the continent every year. Because the security you talk about, which make us a risky continent, comes from the lack of perspective for youth, from the lack of jobs for youth. And how do we create jobs, ladies and gentlemen? It's the entrepreneurs who create jobs. So you see us as a very risky continent. So you finance us, but it's very difficult to get your financing. It takes time. And since there is no financing, so there is not enough creation of jobs. And these young people, what do? So they go to terrorist groups, because these people can give them salaries, or they try to go to Europe and they die in the desert or the Mediterranean Sea. So really our message today is we have a young population on the continent. In my country, Mali, 70% of the population is less than 25 years. This population, young population, is very clever, is very open-minded, is very international, is very digitalized, and they want to create their own jobs. They know that the governments cannot create jobs. They know that we don't have enough job creation by enterprises, and they want to create their jobs. But of course, besides all that was said today, corruption, lack of visibility, lack of clear regulation, lack of the rule of the law, these are all challenges on the continent. But they are ready to tackle these challenges if we can support them, educate them, train them, and on top of that, finance them. So please make financing for SMEs easy, and then we will maybe close the gap on these 15 to 20 million jobs, and then reduce all the instability that we see in our countries, and then make Africa less risky, and maybe the spread that these big guys, these DFIs are taking on loans they give us, which is sometimes 4 to 5 points, maybe that spread will go down. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Super, thank you, and a check of reality. And one thing I take away is that creating jobs is also reducing credit risk. So you can see that. Excellent. I just want to recognize that we're running over time a little. We have some really good speakers left, so I don't want you to leave the room, but I also recognize that you may have other commitments, but we need to go on another 10, 15, 20 minutes, and I hope you want to stay because you don't want to miss the remaining speakers. Just a note on that. So now we're turning to the finance and industry. So Mr. Babakur Khan, CEO of Reliance Financial Services from the Gambia, to the left of me. So maybe you can tell us, with an unstable macro environment, high inflation, disruption in supply chains, and uncertainty about future demand, how is the financial institutions like RFS adjusting to the situation? And often the first clients to be crowded out when risk is increasing are the SMEs, as they're not as resilient as bigger corporates. So what can you do to help that?
Thank you very much, Anders. And it is a very big pleasure to be here. And I want to, before commencing to answer your question, just pick on from where Robert left in terms of minding the gap and the risks or the perceived risks. Yesterday I attended the private sector forum, and I heard that last year the FDI that went to Singapore was more than what went to Africa. And Singapore has a population of about 6 million, and we have 1.4 billion in the whole of Africa. I think that is very revealing. But the lady from Netherlands has also emphasized the kind of response we have seen in terms of Ukraine and what is happening compared to the risks that we face in Africa as a continent. Just to look at the geopolitics. But by the time we look at the LDC and why we are gathered here, 33 of the 47 countries in the LDC are from Africa. So all our plan of action, including the Doha, should have a major concentration to address the big elephant in the room, which is the 70% that are in Africa. I think it's crucial that the resolutions that we leave by the end of this conference gives Africa a very good chunk. Now, coming back to your question, Anders, on stable environment, in the Gambia, interest rates have been coming up for a good number of years, and according to the records, the last time we had an increase in interest rates was in May 2015. May 2015. Since then, they have been on a decline, all the way down to 10%. But by the time Russia illegally invaded Ukraine, in September last year, interest rates started taking a complete U-turn. Almost every 2 months, the central bank has been increasing interest rates, the monetary policy rate, from 10% to as at this January 14%. What has Gambia got to do with the war in Ukraine? But we have now imported all the macro economic fundamentals to give my friend, the Minister of Finance, the biggest challenge that he has to manage. And these are our realities. Inflation in the Gambia is now at 13%. And as financial institutions, we want to support the MSMEs so that they can grow. They can create the employment we desire and generate the revenue that our Minister of Finance needs in order to support public services. Now, under these circumstances, how would this be possible? How can the cost of credit be cheap when the monetary policy rate is at 14%, inflation is at 13%? These are the dilemma we face. But for us as Gambians and Gambian-owned company and managed, the SMEs are our lifeblood. The entrepreneurs are our brothers, our sisters, our mothers and fathers. And we will go all the way out to make sure they stay in business. And my company, Reliance, since 2020, has frozen payment of dividend to recapitalize so that we can withstand any shocks from our SME borrowers, just to make sure that they stay afloat. And this is a big cost to our shareholders because they have invested to make returns on their investments. But under these circumstances and given the risks that are very much inherent in a macroeconomic environment, there was no justification for us to be very aggressive without making sure that we have the adequate protection. Now, as a financial institution, apart from the need to make sure we have the right capital so that we can begin to support our MSME clients, the regulation is equally very expensive. Because for every $100 we mobilize, we have to keep 8% with the central bank as cash reserve, which is non-interest bearing. On top of that, for every $1 loan we give, we have to provide an equal amount in capital adequacy. Because of the risk that is attached, the passive risk. Robert, I have to come back to you on the gap to the MSMEs client. And this represents a major challenge. And this will not be solved anytime soon without the urgent and timely intervention of the donor partners, the development partners, UNCDF, so that together we can catalyze the much needed funding in order to address this sector that we are all in agreement are the major source of growth for the least developed countries. That's the fact. And that is why we're here. Now, on the second question, in terms of what we are doing to support, when the COVID struck, we went to the central bank and engaged them to allow us to give moratorium on loan repayments. And that was a major source of relief for most of our clients. It was costly for us, but we felt it was what the right thing to do given the circumstances they were faced with. And I must say that was a fantastic help. And there was actually no limit based on the approval that was granted to us by the central bank at the time. But beyond that, we recognize that the products and services that we have to support the MSME clients are very limited.
is basically a loan or a line of credit. But the challenge is the source of funding for us is very short-term in nature, and there is a limit as to how long we can grant loans for, which can be counterproductive if investments are required for the medium to long term. Because otherwise you are choking the MSMEs in terms of stretching their cash flows to make repayments within a shorter period that would be practical when linked to their cash flows. And it is for this reason, again, that we are appealing to the donor partners, to the development partners, to help support the UNCDF. For the Gambia and for us Reliance, there's been a lifeline, because we are beneficiaries to their Cash Forward program, and also another grant that they gave to provide funding to women in helping them to access loans using digital financial services. And I'll be the first to admit that without their intervention, there is no way that we would have gotten what the funding. But beyond that, the courage to work with those women in particular, but most importantly the MSMEs, because of the risks that are inherent in those sectors of their activity. So it is crucial that we are able to diversify the product base, and this will require technical assistance as well, so that the right capacities are embedded at the institutional level, but also at the client level, because one cannot go without the other. These two, they have to go hand in hand. And as a practitioner, seeing and engaging with MSMEs on a daily basis, we can do a lot to change what they are doing for the better. And if we take the example of Bangladesh, where it has taken them 40 to 50 years to emerge from LDC, a country like us, we do not have that time. So please, time is of the essence for us. And once again, we are just appealing that you come to us now. It's urgent. We have a very youthful and growing population, and it is important that we are able to give them the life and dignity that we promised, as stated by the lady, so that together we can begin to start our journey from least developed to a prosperous country with pride and the aspirations that we desire for ourselves and the people of our country. Thank you very much.
Super, thank you. You may even have a political career possibility. So I just want to make one question. So you said that the 14%, but that's not really what the SMEs are facing. That's the interbank, right? So the SMEs are facing higher rates, like over 50. Yeah, all right, great. So this was an appeal to the development partners. So that's a great segue to turn to USAID, who's here, represented by Mr. Andrew Haskovitz, Chief Development Officer at the USAID.
Sorry, that's at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation.
Sorry, yeah, that's something else.
Yeah.
That's DFC. Sorry, yeah.
DFC.
Right. So Andrew, maybe what can development partners like yourselves do better in supporting the missing middle? We were discussing the range here, but it's really small loans up to 4 or 5 million. What kind of innovative, scalable blended finance initiative can the international community and development partners like DFC support to better build this continuum of investments for SMEs in the business?
Let me start by saying this is actually the most important session in this conference as far as I'm concerned, because what we're trying to do is tackle the real issues of how do you get money to the missing middle, and the fact that the missing middle doesn't have money is the reason why countries remain as LDCs to a large degree. And so I'm going to share a few things, a few thoughts with you. DFC is the U.S. government's development finance institution, and other than UNCDF, which I feel like is really, like as Kitty was saying, is the only institution that really gets it, that's targeted at that population. DFC, when we were established 3 years ago as a merger between the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC, and USAID's Development Finance, Development Credit Authority, was meant to address this issue, and we were structured differently than every other DFI and MDB in the world. And that's what we need to tackle here. We need to figure out the fundamental flaw in the structuring of the DFIs and the MDBs so we can get back to why they were created as public sector institutions that aren't chasing a return, because almost every single one of them has to earn a return for a shareholder, but rather figuring out how to use public sector dollars in a more efficient way than ODA, right? So it's not trying to be commercial. You want to be as close to commercial as you can be, but really what you're trying to do is figure out how to make more efficient use of ODA resources and use private sector money and financing for doing that. I'm going to throw a number out to you, $7.4 billion. That's the amount of money that DFC dispersed last year. I love that number, and I absolutely hate that number. Let me tell you why I hate it. I hate it because that's absolutely no indication about whether we're being effective or not. Sure, it's great to have $7.4 billion being put into economies, but when you're judging your success by the amount of money that you're dispersing, that scares everybody off from chasing the deals that you should be chasing. So, by comparison, DFC has a $3 billion portfolio in India. Okay, $3 billion, that seems like a lot of money. India's GDP is $3 trillion. So $3 billion is about 0.1% of the GDP of India. By comparison, Burundi has a GDP of about $3 billion. Not 3 trillion, 3 billion. So literally doing a $3 million loan in Burundi would have almost the same impact. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit about it, but economically, as we do doing $3 billion in India. Now, how many people are chasing $3 million deals in Burundi? I can tell you last year, DFC, like we're doing great with deals under $10 million. When you get below $5 million, we have a lot of work to do. We only have a handful of deals under $5 million. And why is that? It's hard. It's hard to find these deals. And as my colleague here said, it's a nightmare doing business with us. It's not necessarily our fault. Okay? There are just a lot of requirements and a lot of expectations from the international community that we make sure that we comply with environmental and social and governance standards, which are important. But for a small business to comply with all those standards, it can be a nightmare. And so we have to figure this out. We can work through financial intermediaries. But so there are a few things that we're doing. Okay? One, when I first got there, I got very frustrated. I came from USAID because I noticed that we were saying no to any business that came to us that needed less than $1 million. And I said, wait, when we consolidated all the U.S. government's lending pools into one agency and really put it into an agency that traditionally had been doing deals of $50, $100 million, what incentive is there to work with these small African businesses that are coming to us? So we created a program called the African Small Business Catalyst Facility that's focusing on deals of less than $1 million. That still didn't solve the issue because even that's moving slowly because we still have a lot of these requirements which make it a nightmare. But now I'm trying to figure out how do we reach the businesses between $1 million and $5 million? And how do we create incentives for our deal teams? Because if you have a choice between working on a $3 million deal in Guinea or a $500 million financing in India, which deal do you think that our investment teams are going to want to work on? They're going to get a pat on the back for doing a $500 million deal. So we're working on a concept for a team that would focus on these small deals with separate KPIs. Also, people who would work in fragile areas as well. You also have the issue of the 1 to 5 million and then the under $1 million. So our conclusion is it's probably easier for us to work through financial intermediaries. But here's the problem with working through financial intermediaries, and this is again a point that you made. When we lend to a bank, which then lends to a microfinance institution, which then lends to a farmer. Everybody's getting their piece. By the time that farmer gets a loan, the farmer's paying 28% interest. Now, do we as a public institution need to make 4%? We don't. But the way that every single DFI and MDB is structured in this way, that they do have to make the spread. DFC doesn't. So what I would say to our colleagues in LDCs, you have been very vocal over the last year saying that the DFIs and the MDBs are not offering the right types of tools, the right types of financing, and I would say continue to be vocal. We were at a conference about a year ago, and one of the people who helped create Proparco and AFD approached me, and I think I said very similar things to what I'm saying right now. And he said, you know, looking back, we made a mistake in the way that we structured these organizations. And so what you're saying makes absolute sense. We need to fix this. We need to fix the way that we're structured, because so long as these institutions are structured to have to earn a return for their shareholders, they're not going to be able to deliver on their mandate. I'm going to leave you with one last point. So DFC, we did $7.4 billion last year. But if you look at the Build Act that established DFC, it says that one of the things we're required to do is to pursue highly developmental projects of all sizes, especially those that are small, but designed for work in the most underdeveloped areas, including countries with chronic suffering as a result of extreme poverty, fragile institutions, or a history of violence. We have to live up to that mandate. That's what my job is as Chief Development Officer. I have to be vocal about it, but I also recognize that I'm pushing back against a strong desire and a lot of people patting an agency on the back for moving big numbers. So we need to work on impact and make sure that we're reaching the people who need the money the most.
So thank you, Andrew, and we will remember to continue to be vocal about the right finance from the IFIs. I think that is something that the UNCDF can support you on as well, both overseas and DFC. Great. So moving on, we have two more speakers. So I'm very proud to ask Honorable Leone Mpuchuana, Minister of Foreign Affairs in Lesotho, to take the floor. Honorable Minister, how is the government of Lesotho trying to increase access to finance for SMEs? And what concrete policy are you seeing your government is taking? Knowing that you're from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, obviously, but surely you know the government, you can represent the government in these areas as well. Over to you.
Thank you very much, moderator. Maybe first of all I should start by saying, Mr. Andrew, I'll be glad if you can channel just $5 million to Lesotho. Being the highly vulnerable, very small state, not just the least developed country, but also the single country landlocked. You can just imagine how vulnerable my country is. The other point that I would really like to make is the least developed countries, as we are the most vulnerable and the most exposed to the global shocks. You will realize that we have got the high and the increasing unemployment rates. And on that note, there is something that I've realized in my country. With the increasing unemployment rate, there is an increase also in the micro and small and medium enterprises. Because when these people go to school after graduation from university, they have to survive. If they don't get a job, they start a business. So you realize that there is a high increase in the small and medium enterprises in the least developed countries, especially in Lesotho. And we most definitely require support in that area. There's a notion that when you give me a fish, I'll eat for a day. But when you teach me how to fish, I'll eat for the lifetime. So in the least developed countries, you also realize that the education system that we have is the one that will mostly produce officers that will seek employment rather than entrepreneurs who start a business. And one of the key factors that the new government of Lesotho is looking into is to build productivity in Lesotho. And you cannot build productivity in a country if you don't reform the education system of the country. So we intend to reform our education system and ensure that entrepreneurship and business management is entrenched into the education system from the early age, as early as primary education. So we also intend to have business and entrepreneurship competitions from primary school to high school and to the university level to ensure that we entrench and make sure that our students they prefer business management rather than being officers. And they will start thinking about businesses, they will start savings for businesses from that early age, such that when they get out of school, they have got adequate expertise and some little of capital to start businesses, because the most difficult part to start a business is the capital. So as the government of Lesotho, through our development agency, Lesotho National Development Corporation, we have established the partial credit guarantee scheme for the small and medium enterprises. And we are sharing the risk with the enterprises when they borrow from the banks. However, I really don't think that is enough. We need to do more. Because as the nation, we are highly exposed to the international global shocks, like the COVID-19, like the war in Ukraine, where you see the food prices going up. And you definitely have to reprioritize. And the little economy that you have in Lesotho, you have to take the bigger chunk of the money into the road infrastructure that has been washed away by the climate change effects. How much are you going to invest into the economic development? Maybe nothing. So we most definitely, like my brother from Gambia has said, we most definitely, as the least developed countries, require support. But let me also touch on the very two critical issues that we would like to do as the government of Lesotho. We would like to establish what is called the National Investment Fund as Lesotho. The National Investment Fund that is a bit inclusive. A certain shareholding will be owned by the government, but we also want to ensure that other part of the National Investment Fund is owned by the local corporates, small and medium enterprises, as well as the individuals in Lesotho. We believe we will be able to balance the external shocks when we have got our own investment funds in Lesotho. Secondly, we are also on the verge of establishing the National Development Bank, which we believe can now provide the financial assistance to the small and medium enterprises, rather than them to go and face the commercial banks in order to get the funding. There's a practice that is really shocking. When you go to these least developed countries like my country, part of the communities that can be successful small and medium enterprises are also employees, for instance, of the public sector. The same employee of the public sector can go to a bank and require a loan for his personal car or residential house. They get that loan. But if the same person requires the same amount of money to start a business, they will not get that loan. It is said to be high risky, and my question is, what is the risk? That is the perceived risk. Because if someone says, I'm still working, but I need some money to have the other sources of income to get into business, and they say, no, we cannot give you this money. It is really shocking. We are also through the support of the World Bank under what is called the Lesotho Enterprises Assistance Program. Also has we are also providing the technical support to our SMEs to access some of the funding and also to establish some of the programs that are developing specifically or mostly for the rural areas, whereby we've got the projects. We've got one big orchard for the community project covering around 200 villages. We have now accessed the money through the World Bank with the assistance of the Lesotho Enterprises Assistance Program. The other part that as the government of Lesotho would like to do is also now to build or assist our SMEs with the access to market. We would like to assist our SMEs to access our local market, but not just that. Any SME who we believe that has grown to a certain level, as the government would like to take an initiative to export their products into other markets. So as the government of Lesotho, we are eager to build our SMEs community. But I'm really concerned with the system or the regulatory environment, especially the political sector. Remember, every organization that is operating in any country, it has been regulated by us as the politicians. And you will also learn and understand that anybody can be a prime minister, anybody can be a president in a number of countries. As much as you are popular enough, you get the vote to be the prime minister. It is very shocking. Because if anybody can be a prime minister, it means even the good policies that were put on the table, when the new prime minister or the president comes, the president goes. So that area of the political space, we believe, also has to be regulated in order to ensure that as much as someone is popular, but there are still other minimum requirements that has to be met in order to cover or protect the nations. I thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, and it's good to hear that the government of Lesotho is ambitious in a number of programs there. I took note of the guarantee scheme, your National Investment Fund, and your Lesotho Enterprise program. Great, so we come to the last intervention, and maybe even the most important intervention, because it's an intervention by a representative of a small SME, Altec, in Congo, and we have Mr. Malango Washilika, a co-founder and CEO of Altec from Congo here, over there. And you have recently received a concession loan from UNCDF to grow your business. Could you please tell us about your company's growth trajectory and the role that concessional finance can support? And can you also try to describe the challenges you and other young companies in your country face in accessing funding from domestic banks?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, maybe still young and small, but I think the concessional loan has helped a lot to grow, as it is shown. My name is Malango Shikala. I am the co-founder and CEO of Altec Group, which is a clean energy and a sustainable transportation company that has been operating in the DRC for the last 8+ years. So we started very small because you know, the DRC is a very huge country with a very huge problem of access to electricity. We have about 100 million people there, over 100 million people, and it's only around 15 or 20% of those that have access to electricity. So we were born basically and grew up in poverty, you know, myself. And this is one of the reasons why we started Altec Group. So we do pay as you go solar. So We sell on credit solar systems using a technology that is called, popularly known as pay-as-you-go. We have been, over the years, we have been able to, reach almost, by the end of this year, we will have reached almost 500,000 households, 500,000 households across the DRC. And we are very ambitious because, as you said, we have about 85 million people that do not have access to electricity in the DRC. So we still have a lot of work to do. In terms of sustainable transportation, we are doing electric mobility. We've started with electric motorcycles. Because when you travel in all these African capitals, what you see is that motorcycles play a huge role as one of the main public transport means. But also it also employs a lot of young people. It provides jobs to those people. So we are currently running pilots in 4 Congolese cities, including Kinshasa, Lubumbashi, Goma, and Kisangani. And the idea is really to have, a fleet of 50,000 electric motorcycles in the next 5 years, and that will be able to generate 100+ million in revenues annually. We're also doing some, as far as the electric mobility is concerned, we are also currently doing a pilot. We are about to start a pilot with some mining companies there. So the DRC contributes a lot in terms of minerals that are very essential to this green economy. We also have huge forests, definitely, but we also need to make sure that those are really supporting the world. The minerals, they're creating batteries for the EVs in the US and other places. In the Congo, we don't have EVs at the moment, cars and things like that. But we are bringing now electric motorcycles, and the forest definitely helping the world. But also, we really need to make sure that we are not staying behind and really moving forward, also transitioning our economy to the green economy. So we are also doing some pilot in the mining sector. There is a lot of huge equipment in the mining sector that use petrol and diesel. So we are trying to replace all of those with electric mining equipment. So since a couple of years ago, I think it was 2021, we received a concessional loan from UNCDF that helped us a lot in terms of growing the business, but also in terms of credibility. You don't know how many people you can attract if you already have UNCDF on it. It's one of your lenders. So we grew from a business that we were doing $2 million in terms of revenue, less than 5 in less than 5 when we got the loan. Last year, 2022, we did almost 20+ million in revenues. And this year we're projecting to do $30 million in revenues. Again, using UNCDF and others, we have been able to, over the last 2+ years, we have been able to attract more than 35 million in funding, costly debt. And definitely it's having UNCDF and others, as some of our lenders in that credibility, I think, and things like that. We are a profitable company, so that is also very important, and we are able to pay our lenders. So, for instance, in 2022, we paid almost $5 million. This year we'll be paying like $10 million. So we have very, very, very ambitious goals. By 2025, we want to really reach 1 million households with our product across the DRC. and you know, try to get to $100 million revenues a year. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of the barriers that we face with local banks, which now they are learning to us now, but in the beginning definitely it's about high interest rates, but also these other conditions like collateral. They will ask you collateral, we don't have votes to give. It's collateral. But also, like sometimes they don't even also understand some new business models. But for instance, if we tell them like you have to consider our receivables as collateral, they say okay, but they don't, you know, take it seriously somehow. Yeah, but as I said, now we have been now working because we have been working with Equity Bank and Law Bank. We have succeeded to get some of the loans, couple of, you know, a few 1 million from Equity Bank and a few too from Law Bank, which has helped. But again, it thanks to this, you know, because sometimes we just, even in terms of negotiation, in terms of interest rate, we just take these contracts from other lender, concessional lenders, and say, okay, you know, these are the rates we are getting at the moment, and this help us negotiate with these local banks anyway. Yeah. So it's very important that for the governments, I think there is nothing to lose for the government just to remove all these barriers to get money in. You know, just, you know, you stand to gain by removing barriers, because sometimes it's very, you know, there are a lot of like procedures and the policies that hinder like the provision of capital to SMEs. Yeah. But for the international community, definitely, and I said it in the last section, definitely, let us work with local companies. It's very important, local companies. You know, I stand here like as a local company, as a champion, as one of the representatives of local companies that are credible, that they can do a lot of things, you know, and achieve a lot and pay debt. And, you know, so let us like try and believe in local companies and believe in visions that local founders, you know, sell. Because at the end of the day, when we are talking about bringing development in these LDC countries, they really need to participate, not only the government, but also the private sector. And I'm talking about the local private sector has to participate too. So it's very important that local companies can be trusted, because if they are trusted, and they can do a lot of things. Thank you so much.
Super. Thank you very much for your intervention and your emphasis on believing on local businesses, which I think is very important. Thank you all. It's been a very, very rich discussion. Time has not been on our side, but we have had a very good exchange, so I'm happy with that. Let me give you three quick conclusions from what I heard. So the first one is, you know, the importance of more ODA to LDCs, especially to mobilize SMEs, SME finance, the missing middle. And what we want to do is to prove that the perceived risk is higher than the actual risk, and that will crowd in other more commercial funds. The second one is the need to change the international financial architecture, to have IFIs adjust their financial products to be better fit for the LDC's economies. The third one is about the macro instability that we all have heard is very much important to many of the LDCs, and just let's hope that the macro stability in the world will be better tomorrow than it is today. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this session. I also want to thank Casper and Abhishek, the UNCDF team who's been doing this, as well as Nasser over there. Thank you guys, and have a good day.